Welcome. In this video we'll be graphing trigonometric functions. Sine Part 4. Example. Use a graph of the parent function shown below to sketch the stated function using radians. Also find the amplitude and period of the function. In this case, our function of interest is y equals sine of theta plus pi over 2. So let's go ahead and figure what the amplitude is. Recall that the amplitude is the distance from the midline to the maximum or the distance from the midline to the minimum. In this case, we're going to figure it out by taking the absolute value of the coefficient of sine. Notice that sine has an implicit 1 here as its coefficient, so amplitude is equal to the absolute value of 1, which happens to be 1. In terms of the period, one has to take the period of the parent function and divide that by the absolute value of the coefficient of theta. Since we're dealing with the function involving sine, we take the period of sine, which is 2 pi, and we are going to divide that by the absolute value of the coefficient of theta. Again, in this case, the coefficient of theta happens to be an implicit 1. So we take the absolute value of 1 here. And the period becomes 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 1, which is 1. Thus, you get that the period is 2 pi radians here. Now, the last thing you need to know in order to be able to sketch this is that using our work on transformations, if you were to have y equals a sine of theta plus pi over 2, what this indicates, it's a horizontal shift since it's occurring inside the parentheses for the input. And in this case, it's a horizontal shift of pi over 2 units left because of this positive, okay? So let's go ahead and graph our newly defined function. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take the critical values here. Let's say we focus on 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And we're going to have to shift their corresponding inputs and related outputs pi over 2 units to the left. So notice here you had 0. So if you were to start 0, you're going to move pi over 2 units, okay, so over here, and you're going to get an output of 0 there. Then at pi over 2, you had an output of 1. So if you are at pi over 2, you're going to shift pi over 2 units, and then your output is 1. The next one you have here is pi, and your output was 0. So then you're going to shift at pi over 2 units to the left, and keep your output as 0. Then at 3 pi over 2, you had an output of negative 1. So we're going to go to 3 pi over 2, and we're going to shift that pi over 2 units, and we're going to get our output of negative 1. Next, you had 2 pi, which had an output of 0. So you take 2 pi, you're going to shift pi over 2 units to the left, and you're going to get your output of 0. Let's do one more value here. So if we had 5 pi over 2, your output is 1. So 5 pi over 2, we're going to shift pi over 2 units to the left, and your output is going to be 1. Now let's go ahead and sketch this one. Okay, so we can say, well, this is how your function looks like. So forth. And we can include the arrows at the end. Okay, you can see here it will continue, so it's going to become a 0, and then a negative 1, and so forth. And that is your quick sketch for your function y is equal to sine of theta plus pi over 2. So that concludes this video on graphing trigonometric functions, Sine Part 4. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.